Hello and welcome to Daily Politics, reaching you from Trust TV here in Abuja. On this program, we discuss issues around politics, policy, and governance. My name is Suleiman. Following the coming into effect of the new Electoral Law 2022, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, has adjusted the 2023 general election timetable. This was earlier released in 2021. The INEC chairman, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, disclosed these slight changes to the election calendar at a news conference in Abuja last Saturday. In the new timetable, the presidential and National Assembly elections will now hold on February 25, 2023. Also, the governorship and state houses of assembly elections will hold on the 4th of March 2023. All of that is about 7 full months away from today. Nigeria's electoral law has been amended 4 times since 1999. The 1998-1999 elections were administered by the transitional decrees until these were repealed and reenacted as the Electoral Act 2002. After the 2003 elections, this law was in turn repealed to give way to the Electoral Act 2006. But following the 2007 elections, which is often described by some as the worst election in Nigerian history, the 2006 Act was also amended to give us the Electoral Law 2010. The 2010 Act was used for the following 3 general elections in 2011, 2015, and 2019. But after several attempts and massive interest and efforts by politicians, INEC, civil society organizations, and the media, the 2010 Act was finally amended. The 2010 Electoral Amendment Bill was finally signed into law last week by President Muhammadu Buhari. Many Nigerians have described this new law as a significant step forward for our democracy. But it is one thing to make good laws. It is another to enforce them faithfully. So tonight we're asking, how will the new act affect INEC preparations for the 2023 elections? How will this law transform the political space in Nigeria as we move towards the elections next year? And how will all this gain Nigerians, and particularly Nigerian democracy, as we gear up towards another election? With me to discuss all of these issues are 2 people who, in their own different ways, have been deeply involved in all of these efforts to transform our electoral system since 2010. Mr. Rotimi Eyekame is the Chief Press Secretary, that is the CPS, to the Honorable Chairman of INEC, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu. When he speaks, it is the Chairman who speaks. Also with me is Samuel Oyimafu Asimi, who is Program Officer with CISLAC. Welcome to Daily Politics, gentlemen.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. But before we dive right into it, we'll take 1-minute break, and when we return, we'll be talking about how the new electoral law will benefit Nigerians and Nigeria itself as we move towards 2023 elections. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're just discussing how the electoral law will affect the election, whose timetable has already been readjusted. So maybe we can start from there. We have a new law. Before now, each time Nigerians hear that election timetable has been adjusted, it usually causes a lot of uproar in the system. But this time around, it doesn't cause much of that. So what will this mean for the electoral timetable, this new law? How are you preparing towards the elections?
Thank you very much. The first thing is, let me take you back in time.
Yes.
Sometime in 2017, the Commission established a principle. The principle was intended to engender certainty. And what is this principle? That the 3rd Saturday of February of every general election here is when the general election will commence.
Interesting.
And when we established that principle, we were able to give the date for the general election after 2019 to name any year. You can just calculate it by looking at the third Saturday every 4 years, and then you will know that that's when the first version, that's the presidential and National Assembly, will take place, where and then the
governorship and the House
will take place 2 weeks later. Now, we have been on this attempt to amend the Electoral Act for years.
Okay.
And the last National Assembly had tried its best. We had expected that we'll be able to use it for 2019 general election. But at the last minute, there was this issue between the National Assembly and the presidency. And unfortunately, we could not get the president's assent.
But what would that certainty, that principle of certainty, because I'm interested in it, because it's similar to what obtains in other democratic spaces. For example, every Tuesday, first Tuesday in the United States, on election year, and not just for presidential elections, but in fact, for all the other lower level elections. Right. In the UK, the first Thursday in May, right. Things like that.
Conducting a general election is a huge outlay of activities. Logistics, deployment in terms of men and material is huge. You conduct trainings. For 2019, we hired about 1 million ad hoc staff.
1 million people.
Right. And you have to train these people. We use technology. You have to think of how to deploy this technology. By 2019, we had about 119,974 polling units. You have to deploy to each of these polling units because election must take place on the same day at the same time. Apart from that, INEC is not the only body involved in elections. We have other critical stakeholders. We have the political parties. We have even the voters themselves. We have the observers. So when we established that principle, it was intended to give room for adequate long-term planning. So you can then project that 1 year from now, these are the things you need to do before the election. So that was the idea. And I think people loved it. And that's the thing that we have decided to bank on from them.
Interesting. Mr. Samuel, but your organization is one of the observers the CPS was talking about, because you also host the Transition Monitoring Group in CISLAC, and your chair is the head of that in Nigeria. Now, how does this new law open up the electoral space, for all the major actors that he mentioned, the voters, INEC, political parties, going towards the 2023 elections? And maybe if we had had the law passed last year, would that have made any difference as well?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It is a progressive law, I think, generally, if you look at it from the different angles. And we're actually very, very happy about this. Last week, Tuesday, precisely, we're actually out at Unity Fountain calling on the president to assent to that piece of legislation, because we understand what it holds for the country. Specifically, if you look at the adoption of technology around the electioneering process, I think very, very important is the transmission of results, INEC determining.
How does that really change the game from the previous methods that we had? Because in 2015, 2019, 2011, we didn't have electronic transmission of results. And by and large, there was a lot of confidence in these results, not only by Nigerians, but also even people like yourselves, observers, but also external observers. So how does this generally, by itself, how does that change the landscape?
I think it makes our elections better in terms of the transition of the results. Because if you look at it, the normal modus operandi is lots of things happen during the transmission of the results, lots of allegation when it's moving at all those levels. You talk of the human resources being spent on this, you talk of security, you talk of threats to lives in the process. Once we have this transmission in process and once it's actually applied in the electoral law itself, I think that's actually very good. Then also looking at timelines as well. I think some timelines were defined. You notifying INEC 21 days before you conduct your primaries, having some clear guidelines as to when a candidate dies, when the party can actually have a replacement and the rest. I think those are actually, they really speak to the issues and some gaps. And you could also look at inclusivity around persons with disability, ensuring that they can actually also participate in the process. So these were points civil society actually wanted in there, and it's actually good to know that these points are also reflected in there.
Thank you. We will come to the disability issues later in the program, because the impact of that needs to be measured against the total number of disabled people who are voters in the country, you know, but we will come to that. The issue of electronic transmission, I want to stay on that a little, because INEC kind of found a way to maintain that balance, you know, even though it was being drawn into politics at the time by both the various push and pull forces, you know, the National Assembly members, the governors, the political parties, everyone was interested. Somehow INEC found a way to meander through it without getting involved with anyone. But the key question is, how do you think that electronic transmission can improve upon what you're already doing and doing well?
Well, the application of technology helps a lot.
Okay.
At the Commission, we feel that the less you have human interference with the process, the better.
Okay.
Because it is at the process of collation and transmission, like you said, that you find some people trying to tamper with the results.
By tampering, you mean rigging?
Well,
okay.
You know, like the process of, you know, kidnapping our returning officer, putting a gun to his head and forcing him to
declare a different result.
And you know that once that declaration is made, nothing can change it except the court of law. So they will say, go to court, because they know that technically the court does not recognize that you are declaring result under duress. But thank God, the new Electoral Act has taken care of that. We have the right to now review, and these are part of. So the electoral transition for us has helped. If you watch from Edo and Ondo governorship elections last year, INEC created a portal called INEC Result Viewing Portal. And from the polling unit, the presiding officers are expected to snap the result sheet and post directly to that portal.
Just using their phones?
No.
Okay, particular device.
First, we started with the Z-pad.
Okay.
But when we discovered some problems with the Z-pad, we now have what we call the INEC voter enrollment device that we also use for the bimodal voter aggregation scheme. So you use that to take the picture of the result sheet, and then you post straight to the portal. Now, the beauty of all of that is that Nigerians have the opportunity to log on without any encumbrance. All you need is just a username and your password. And then you can go to the polling unit you want. You know, if election starts maybe at 8:30, you wait until the close of poll, and by evening, you start checking the portal. You will see as they are posting live
in real time
of those elections. So Nigerians really love that because they could see transparency. And that is an indication that technology works. And so for us, if we remove human interference as much as possible, people will have confidence in
the result. Thank you. So, but that takes us to the interests that some of these issues that were raised with regards to that, even the electronic transmission. For example, that, okay, somebody may not be able to tamper with the results using at gunpoint like they did, you know, at the polling booth, like you rightly mentioned earlier. But they can tamper with the results as they have been transmitted. Like, for example, hacking into INEC systems and servers. You know, as we speak, there are some groups of people called whatever hackers who are trying to hack into Russian service, you know, in defense of Ukraine. So it means that it can be done, you know. So how will that? How much of a risk does that pose as opposed to manual transmission of the results?
I think with technology, we all have concerns. But that doesn't mean we go back to analog. I'll just give you an example. We have telephones with us. So the fact that maybe your battery could get low doesn't mean we go back to writing letters.
Yes.
Good. So I think what we should just do, and I think this is also up to INEC, is just to ensure that the system is actually very safe-proof. The system can actually withstand that, because if you look at also advanced countries, we have this. I mean, if you even looking at the examples we have, if you go to villages, hometowns, you find people transferring money through POS individuals. They are actually literally everywhere, even more than the ATMs. And we actually trust the systems to actually send funds and monies for us. So I think IT is here to stay. If we embrace it, work on it, look at the gaps.
But what if an actual case arises in which somebody says that results have been tampered with electronically by hacking or something like that? I know that that's probably a question for Mr. Rotimi, and we'll get there. But speaking as those who have been involved in part of drafting these measures in the first place, how does that work out?
Yeah, I'm happy you said this, Mr. Rotimi's question, but of course I could I could put into it. So I think generally this records would also be with them once they snap. I believe they don't discard the documents themselves. They would also have it. So it's almost as if you're having like an online database, and you also have it plus the manual. Okay. So it's not like we're this. So if you even look at it, it's like a double-barreled approach, because you now have like a backup. So I think these are points we can actually take in from. So it's a two-way thing. We're not just abandoning one for the other, but we're taking the both approach in parallel. And I think that's actually a good thing.
Thank you. So I don't know if you wanted to add to that, but I was going to also talk about another key issue in the new act that affects INEC directly, a provision that says that INEC must receive funding for its activities 1 year ahead, So because previously in Nigerian elections, at all times throughout the history of elections in this country, funding INEC has always been one of the levers that the political class, particularly the government in power, I don't know particular government, uses to tighten the screw on the Electoral Commission to get its way sometimes, if not all of the times, So how does that advances INEC's independence,
Well, first of all, I want to give an assurance that we are independent, truly independent.
Interesting.
And I give it to the federal government. They don't interfere with how we conduct elections or how we spend money. Now, it's like somebody that wants to organize a wedding in 6 months and gets the money. The difference of getting the money 6 months to the wedding and getting the money 2 months to the wedding.
Okay.
There's a lot of difference because you see, you have to procure a lot of things. I don't know if Nigerians imagine that organizing a general election in this country is a huge outlay of activities, right? I don't know if even the army, if they are planning war, they have to plan war the way we plan it.
The logistical demand that it entails.
First of all, we don't have all the vehicles. That means we have to bring in vehicle owners. And there are some areas in this country that you can't even get to but they don't have roads. Some areas are through boats. So you have to deal with that. We have to think about security. We have to procure IT materials. We have to hire ad hoc staff. We have to think of ballot papers. We have to think of so many things. And in procuring these things, there are rules. There is a procurement act that states the timeline for doing these things. And if we have the money in good time, we can start the process rather than rushing it. Because what it then means is that if the money comes late, we will be so tight, and then we will not be prepared enough to meet, the target that we want to meet. So this will really, really help us. For me, 1 year is even small. I would prefer 2 years before.
Interesting.
Yeah, because the longer you provide the money, the better. So we won't have any excuse. We'll be able to fulfill all the necessary things we need to fulfill. And for me, 6 months before general election, INEC should be in a comfortable position that all necessary plans have been put in place. So what we'll just be doing 6 months to the election to be reviewing each of the templates. We just put a checklist. Have we done X? It has been done. And trying to see whether these things are in place. So I think it's a good thing.
Thank you very much. But it's one thing for the law to say that. It's another thing for it's good that you said the federal government doesn't interfere with how you spend, but because it is as it should be. But what if the money is not released on time? We live in an economic system where even budgets, monies that are budgeted in the national budget or state government budgets are often not released on time, or not even released at all, or not released as budgeted. What if this provision of the law is not followed faithfully?
The National Assembly members are good people. What I mean by that is that anything that is in the law, they don't want to be seen as jeopardizing it. Everybody knows that every 4 years, we must have a general election.
That's sacrosanct.
The National Assembly worked very hard for this new Electoral Act 2022. And they know the spirit and letter of what is in there. And in any case, they can't get to the National Assembly without being elected. And if the process of electing them is jeopardized, then they know they're in trouble. So I want to believe that they will not jeopardize that area of the law. But
we're only 12 months away. We're right now, if today is 2nd March, right? So if the governorship elections and the presidential elections are happening, we're 12 months away, almost exactly to the week now. Have those funds been released?
Well, I don't have the information.
Okay.
I will have to consult my principal to find out.
Okay.
But I don't think that, as I said, the National Assembly would risk jeopardizing
the elections.
I don't think so.
Thank you. So if you look at Mr. Rotimi's, the CPS's response, it's literally that the concern is more with the logistics of conducting elections, rather than the independence of INEC, that maybe somebody in government, even if someone from INEC is saying that, I think that by itself is a significant distance in Nigerian elections, because 10, 15 years ago, our concern would be less about logistics than people saying that they are on the queue conducting elections, and then somebody says declare results. So that by itself is a sort of an expression of confidence that the system is building, is growing and stronger and stronger. But do you still have concerns regarding independence as someone from outside of INEC?
Like he mentioned, regarding this matter, it's on logistics, and I think that's fine, because giving them a year ahead, it's actually very fine, because we know the challenges. Like you mentioned, they mobilize close to 1 million ad hoc staff. We know how that number is. We know the way the terrains are. And I think I also like a point he mentioned, they wouldn't have any excuse. So, because once it's closed, we know the kind of nightmare it gives. You trying to mobilize security personnel, trying to get some from different states to come and the rest. So I think once they have this beforehand, that's actually a good plus, and they can move with it. Also, the INEC, they are on the first line charge. I think that was budgetary wise. So I think irrespective of the economic conditions, there are matters that should actually be handled very well alongside the judiciary, and I think that shouldn't be much of an issue and a challenge as well. Generally, of course, we've been having improvements if you look at the electoral systems. You mentioned the 2002, which of course lots of individuals had issues, and as we are coming, we are progressing. The laws are getting stronger. Civil society is speaking out. The media is speaking out. We are having new measures, new ways, having technology being added to the electoral
and changes
system.
within INEC itself.
Absolutely. So we are having these changes, and we think it's actually a very good thing. And generally, as civil society, we're actually out to actually ensure that enabling environments and frameworks like the Electoral Act itself are actually available, so that citizens can be able to actually exercise their franchise and votes, and actually their votes will then count.
Thank you. So, but what you mentioned earlier about 119 polling units 119, I think,
Yes.
polling units in the country. For 2019, you know. But INEC has created additional polling units
Right.
in May last year,
That's
about
right.
56,000 of
Exactly.
them, you know, bringing the total to around 170 or
176.
176,000, you know. But these new polling units, we don't know what the objectives are, because the whole idea of increasing polling units has been quite controversial in Nigeria, because sometimes people have even mistaken them for new constituencies and redistricting that people do, demarcation of new constituencies and so on. So how is this going to affect your preparations towards the 2023 elections? We're assuming that you're going to be using these new polling units in that election.
Well, first to the controversies. You know, we have used the same number of polling units to conduct more than 4 general elections.
Interesting.
The Commission tried severally in the past to expand voter access to polling units, to increase polling units. But of course, the conspiracy theorists will always come up with allegations that, you know, we are trying to do this or that. So it had not been possible. But the approach we took this time was that we put all the arguments together, and then we consulted widely.
Interesting.
You know, all our stakeholders, the political parties, the National Assembly, the civil society organization, the media, giving them what I call the naked truth about what is going on. In fact,
what's the naked truth?
In fact, the naked truth, for instance, in Nasarawa, just take the FCT area in Nasarawa, look at the number of people that are living in that area now, and the number of settlements that have sprung up now in the last 5 to 10 years.
Certainly.
And to think that the same number of polling units have been the ones we've been using to conduct elections. You now have, in a polling unit, you have sometimes 2,000 voters. Imagine 2,000 voters descending on a polling unit. How are they going to vote within the record time of 8:30 to 2:30?
To 2:30.
What you then have in that situation is some people get tired and go home without voting, you know, and it became a problem. So we felt that, you know, to solve, because we couldn't create polling units, we created voting points and voting point settlement in the FCT.
Okay.
Now, what we did actually was to convert those voting points and voting point settlement into polling units, so people already knew them. Now, if you have 30 polling units in Oyo State, for instance, and you now have 50 polling units in different areas, then people will have more access to those polling units. So, for instance, if I live in Jabi and my polling unit used to be in Guarekpa, and now that they have created another one, I have one close to Jabi, I will change my voting option from Guarekpa to
Jabi.
I can just walk straight, and so it becomes easy. So the concept of creating voter access has been welcomed, and what has come out of this for us is that it pays to consult. When Nigerians see that you are transparent,
and you mean
that
well,
you are truthful, they will support you.
Interesting.
And when they saw the approach taken by INEC, they supported us.
Interesting.
And that was why we were able to do what INEC could not do in 25 years.
Interesting. In 25 years?
Yes.
Interesting. Thank you. But maybe shortly before we go, I mean, when we return on break, because that raises the question of if someone goes to the polling unit and he gets tired and he leaves, that automatically raises the question of voter turnout, isn't it? So we'll be seeing how the electoral law itself as a whole will likely improve voter turnout in our elections. But that will be when we return from a short break in a minute. Thank you for staying with us. We'll take a minute break. When we return, we'll continue with our discussions with Mr. Rotimi Oyekami, CPS Chief Press Secretary to the Chairman of INEC, and also Mr. Samuel Asimi, who is Program Officer with CISLAC. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is Daily Politics on Trust TV. If you're just joining us, you can follow our discussion on all our social media platforms on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course, Instagram. We are having a discussion on what the new electoral law means for INEC and of course for Nigerian democracy moving towards the 2023 elections. So as I was saying, Mr. Samuel, how does this whole law, because it appears like Nigeria has a problem with voter turnout. In fact, that problem is even weird. Weird because in 1999, we had about 56% voter turnout. We've never made it to that level since then. But whereas the 1999 elections, 2003, 2007, and so on, our elections have been improving. The quality of elections in the country has been improving. There is at least a wide consensus on that, even among people who monitor the process in this. But as the process improves, the voter turnout drops. So what's happening? Is there a correlation between improvement of the process? Is it that Nigerians love elections that don't have quality, or what's going on? But more specifically, how will this new law improve voter turnout?
I think it can be taken in two ways. So first, I would respond to the first point, why we have the disparity. So of course, there won't be any certain answer. We could try to give guesses. And maybe one could be maybe in the past when those numbers were high, maybe because of the quality, there were lots of infractions.
They were padded?
That must have occurred.
Okay.
So that's an argument from different individuals. Secondly, it could also be, as we are moving on, we are having some level of voter apathy from citizens who no longer want to vote. And this is also linking up to the discussion the CPS was having in his previous point, where you have individuals overwhelming the polling units. He said for 25 years. Within that 25 years, you've had children, young people who were giving birth, got up to 18 years of age, and are actually even
now eligible to vote.
Good. So you find out that this pressure is actually mounting on these polling units. And once individuals go to the polling units and see lots of pressure, and of course we know issues around security with the elections, they don't want to stay long there. And once they are staying a bit long there, citizens just feel like, okay, they should just return back to their houses to some form of safety. So I think it can also be another argument in terms of the voter apathy. But generally, we are making the elections better. I think that's very important. Each moves by INEC, by the civil society, by parliament, even by the executive, by assent to this piece of legislation, is actually improving the elections. So that's something we can't take away, because we are moving somewhere and we are living somewhere. And that's very important, because as we take these steps, of course, critics would be there. Once civil society, for example, sees some flaws, would actually raise alarm and say, this is not good, this is good. But then generally it's for the betterment of the country, and we're actually making progress. And I think that's a takeaway from the whole process.
Thank you. The CPS, one of the more interesting, which were proposals even from INEC, because the interesting thing about the electoral law now is it drew a sort of input from a wide range of, it's not the kind of thing you would expect will come from this government, but that's all right. It came, drew a lot of input from many different sources, and it contributed to certain areas, civil society organizations, media, the legislature themselves, the political parties, everyone looked into different areas, and now we have a new law. One of the things that INEC contributed to directly was to increase the period for campaigns from 90 days to 150 days, so that if you wanted to, formal campaigns can now start at least 150 days before the elections, but also that you can start, primaries must be concluded 6 months ahead of election day. What were the reasons? What does INEC want to achieve? How would this affect the elections next year?
Well, for the conduct of primaries, if you had followed the trend, we've been having problematic primaries for many years, and we have been concerned. It's like, litigations fly in
from all directions
every time. Many people don't know some of the challenges INEC faces. Sometimes 2-3 days to election, we will receive a court order. Remove this name, put this name.
From the court?
Yes. When we will have printed the materials for election. Sometimes we will have to condemn some ballot papers on account of a court judgment. So these were issues that we felt that, look, if you conduct primaries and there are issues with those primaries, there should be a time limit to resolve those issues so that you don't then interfere with the electoral process. Because it's a mechanical thing. You take one step after the other, after the other. You can see the end from the beginning because of the mechanical way it is done. But once you put spanner in the work, at some point, it dislodges every other thing. And, it creates what we call panic in the system. So I think that this law, by giving that time limit that resolve these issues before this time is good. As for campaign, well, I think politicians also, lobbied for that.
Okay,
because
interesting.
Yes, because they need more time and resources to get to everywhere. A presidential campaign is not like a local government.
Absolutely.
If you want to be president, that means you must go around the country.
Sometimes several times over.
You need time. We have 774 local governments. How many days will it take you to do that? So you also have to think of a strategy to make sure you cover that. So that's the issue with politicians. But for us, we want everybody to be satisfied so that you will say, okay, the law was against you in a particular way. He squeezed against you in a particular way. But I think for us, the current law is an improvement on the previous law. And I'm sure we'll continue to improve. And INEC is improving because of the scrutiny that we have from civil society, from interested Nigerians. And we are happy. But we also wish that Nigerians will scrutinize the politicians more, the way they scrutinize us.
Interesting. So are you scrutinizing the politicians as much as you, because INEC is institutional and it's a major player within the system, but political parties too, their behavior significantly, either individually as politicians, but also collectively as a party, significantly affects the political system, and even the viability of this new law going forward. So what are you in the civil society doing to hold these other players accountable?
Yeah, so we're trying to engage in the best way we can with the political parties, making them understand this legislation, why they should follow it. These are plans we have for engagements in the build-up to the election. And also, we also scrutinize INEC, like the CPS rightly mentioned. And we also advocate for them to be given the requisite resources and supports. You could see the timeline he mentioned. If they have lots of pressure, they need this time. Why we do that is they are the umpire of the elections. We have provisions that even require the political parties to submit like their audits, political audits. INEC also has its role around political party financing and looking at these political parties. So they actually have the law. So the pressure would be on them, also on the political parties. But then as the electoral umpire, I think we also have lots of expectations from them as regards the provisions of the laws they are actually supposed to ensure that these political parties live up to. So it's a two-way thing. We would engage the political parties, would also engage INEC, and even citizens as well, try to sensitize them so they also come out and also have their bits.
Thank you. So this brings us back to disability question now, which as a principle is something that all of us should normally want to support. But in something that has to do with aggregate numbers, that also involves costs, because sometimes it will cost 3 or 4 times to accommodate one disabled person than maybe the average voter. This is not something necessarily against disabled people. But what does it mean for INEC making provisions for people with some disabilities to be able to vote?
We are really happy to take care of specific needs of persons living with disability. Even before the new Electoral Act, we had adopted at the Commission several measures to attend to the needs of persons living with disability. For instance, for those that have such challenges, we deploy to the specific areas where they are these braille ballots.
Okay.
Because there were allegations, for instance, that because somebody does not see, and if another person is asked to accompany the person may make a wrong choice and all of that. And then for those on the wheelchair, we make it a point of duty that the presiding officer at the polling unit, once you spot somebody on the wheelchair, they are taken straight to the front of the row. It's automatic. Any person with any form of disability are also given the same respect. In fact, visibly pregnant women are also given that privilege. Then the elderly, the elderly really turn out to vote on election day, and we give them that respect. And I think one of the problems we have is gathering the data of where these people are located. And the new law has even actually made that in registering voters, we must now designate, the disability by
status,
form, the status. So that's a new trend that we now need to adopt, so that even if you don't have the correct data of what obtained before,
going forward,
you can then say, okay, out of 1 million registered voters, you have people living with this disability, people living that, and you can isolate the area so that when you're planning for election in those areas, you already have the data to work with, and then you provide the necessary materials. And one of the things, again, that civil society have complained about is access to the voting places. Because we use public buildings, public places, but some of them are not friendly in terms of,
for disabled persons,
for the environment, how they can, because some of those places are in difficult terrains. And these are polling units that we use maybe once in 4 years or once in a blue moon. And then, we don't have the funds to construct, special arrangements, so that's another thing I think the National Assembly we need to look at. How do we deal with somebody on the wheelchair, for instance, if a polling unit is somewhere that you need to go
maybe
over on a hill or a valley, and then how does it get to that place? And then all those issues concerning the environment, then security issues as well. So I think it's an improvement. And we on our own at INEC will continue even to anticipate what we can do to help persons living with disability. And we are engaging seriously with civil society, and they are really helping us in that regard.
But there's another problem in there, in the sense that even among those who are disabled, the percentage that can even make use of the Braille votes, or any kind of Braille facilities or devices when they are available, even when they are available, that percentage is also still small in comparison to the general, for example, those who are blind specifically, but the large numbers of them, particularly those I see in cities like Kano, Kaduna, and many parts of northern Nigeria, the ability to make use of this, to read in Braille, is in most cases not there.
Right.
So what is the arrangement for this specific group?
Well, if we provide a facility and a voter cannot use that facility for one reason or the other, then we have to go back to the normal method of probably accompanying the person in and the person casting the vote. Our officers can supervise, but they are not expected to interfere at all in the process. And we cannot be the one to perform the voting for that person. So the person has to come with somebody trusted, and then we will ensure that the process is done. But I think that the ability to make use of the Braille facility is a very good thing. And some have been able to do that. For those who don't have the opportunity, I think, again, maybe the political parties will help by mobilizing their members to, improve in this aspect.
Or the civil society members who started it all in the first place. Yeah, so you wanted it, you have it.
Yeah, yes. So generally, no price is too much to pay for inclusion. To make citizens feel involved, to get them into the process. And I think if you look at the discussion, INEC is trying to do all things humanly possible to ensure that they actually include the different stakeholders. Now, once these items are provided, while the argument could be that not 100% of those persons with disabilities can access them, but definitely you would agree that some number has actually been reduced, which is progress. That's one. Then secondly, like he mentioned, we also have the previous way of engaging the process where you can have someone trusted that can actually come along. Then I think generally, this would build into other demands, say trying to improve the educational aspects for persons living with disabilities. This would also look at working with different actors to try to educate them, enlighten them on how to actually use these devices and just improve them generally. But I think it's a progressive move. I think that's how we should look at it, and it's a good one for democracy.
Thank you. So, but maybe we're just about a few minutes left. So, and usually I start from the left, and I mean from the right, and end from the left. So, probably about your final question. When can Nigerians expect online voting? You now have online registration. Can we have online voting? Can I vote right in my house without having to go to polling unit?
Well, as soon as the environment is conducive for it, ultimately, technology is the way to go. And INEC has seen, from the evidence we have, that technology has really, really helped. And we have also seen that the less you have human interference with the electoral process, the more credible it is. So I think that, even the electronic transmission, there was some argument initially because people did not really understand. But INEC now, produced an argument, like a statement, and we went to stakeholders to explain what exactly it means. And after that, just like what we did when we wanted to expand voter access, we did this with the electronic transmission of results. And we gave evidence of what we had done. And the INEC result viewing portal was, for us, the catchy phrase that people were able to see. It has demonstrated that, the results that we posted to the portal were the same result that were declared eventually. So the element of trust is the thing. Once Nigerians trust you, once they are convinced that you are honest, you are saying the truth, they will support. But I think that technology is the way to go, and we will get there eventually.
Thank you very much. So we keep refining the system, even if we no longer have to worry about our elections forever, there will still be small room for improvement, isn't it? All systems are like that. But for those of you in civil society, what are your expectations, from this law to the outcome of the 2023 elections? What can you say about that election?
Yes, so I think we've had lots of improvements, like we've been discussing. But an area we would actually appreciate more improvement would be around the area of political party financing. Ensuring that they adhere to the laid down rules. Because generally we have what we call like a vicious circle. So you have political
party financing in Nigeria. Nigerians don't pay to vote. In most other countries of the world, people pay for good governance. People actually pay to support candidates and political parties. You don't have that in Nigeria. So what other alternatives do you expect politicians and political parties, how do you expect them to get financing?
Yeah, just to clarify, so I think even these new laws give spending caps margin for politicians to use. Donations capped at 50 million, I think, at some point.
15 billion for president.
Yes,
for individual.
Yeah,
5 million.
Yeah, good. So there are different caps for candidates. So I think it's a good way to start, because it would help while we are sanitizing the process. We should also sanitize the candidates coming. This is because it shouldn't just be left alone to money bags, individuals who have, say, the deepest pockets. If there is a cap, by all means, INEC should ensure that political parties play by the rule and adhere to that cap. Because what that does is you have individuals who might not have very deep pockets, but they actually have substance to bring to bear.
Absolutely.
And it shouldn't just exclude them from the process. So those laws are in place. And once we press for adherence, INEC is doing a very good job around other systems. Of course, we know issues around capacity challenges as some of their staff sometimes are ad hoc staff for this process. But it would actually be a very good point to push because if you look at leaks, look at revelations from the Pandora to Paradise to Panama, we have names of politically exposed persons across divides, across regions,
the world.
Across political parties. And our fear from the civil society point of view is some of these assets would definitely be deployed at some point to the electoral systems. And once we have individuals breaking these political party financing laws, you start seeing issues like vote buying and the rest coming in. So we feel INEC working closely, of course, with, say, the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, NFIU, the EFCC, to ensure that political party financing is actually sanitized. So at least the NFIU, of course, they have the statements of individuals. Suspicious transaction reports can be reported. So this should actually also be monitored. So it's not just one for just the people with the money, but we also have individuals with substance coming in.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rochimi, I would love to ask you on how you are going to enforce those laws. But instead, I would say thank you very much for being, for being on the show with us because our time is up. We hope that we'll be able to invite you here again to speak on because we're in an election year and more Nigerians would love to see and hear what you are doing. Thank you very much, Mr. Samuel and Sislak, for coming on the show and for all your insights. Thank you also, our viewers, for staying with us through the program tonight. We hope you'll be here with us again tomorrow when we meet on another edition of Daily Politics on Trust TV. My name is Suleiman Suleiman. Good night.